Hello. We are here. Thank goodness we got on, Jesse. Welcome.
Thank you. It feels like I don't know, the universe didn't want it or something there. Didn't want us to speak the truths.
It's a little bit like the election. Like we were going to get there no matter what, but we just took its time and our sound wasn't working. I couldn't hear you. You couldn't hear me. Let's hope. It's always a bit of a delay. Let's have a look and see whether people can hear us. We'll just wait. Oh, does it look like we have some? Oh, Renee's there. We're on. We made it. Well, if Renee's there, we're just doing it. If we've got one person, we're doing it.
We're in.
I hope everyone loves our title, From Trump to AOC, which is, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was the youngest ever congresswoman in America, and 31. Fabulous. Oh, there's Sandy. Hi, lovely to see you guys. We are very excited to talk about this today, and we are seeing we're going to have a look at how we've got to be here, what's going on, and how the generations have made such a difference, but why there's so much reason to be hopeful. That's what we're about, really, isn't it, Jess? There's a lot of work to be done, but I think we've escaped. I know we have escaped our worst nightmare, which is another 4 years of white patriarchal misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, racism, social injustice, austerity. We actually have escaped the worst of that. Not all of it, but we have escaped the worst of it.
Yeah, and I think it's about helping shift our perspective a little bit too, because watching the election and it's very easy to get a little bit nihilistic and a little sort of pessimistic about the outlook of the world, and hopefully we can help shift that a little bit.
There's a lot to be
hopeful about, and I hope it lights a bit of a fire under our bums.
Yes, and we get an idea of what we need to be doing personally, because we're part of this movement of reimagining the world. We're on the cusp of a change of eras, and there's a part for all of us. Hi, Chantel, lovely to see you again. So the place to start, Jesse, is to understand Trump's popularity and how we got here, and let's do a little bit of a summary, which we've been doing in the Persona Grata groups, the online groups that we have. It's looking at the generations and understanding that our values are very much dictated by our peers and our generations that we were born into. And of course, we've looked further, like our social cultural map. That's what we've been looking at. But if I want to do just a little bit, oh, no, we're not a few generations away. Just wait. We're not. We're on our way. Hang in, Facebook user. Hang in. There's very good news. And we've got numbers and facts because Jesse's got Al. I'm a raven. So I'll just pull it in. I'm just pulling it in, people. But I've also been watching the coverage since 6 a.m. for 3 mornings. But can you see I'm looking a bit closer to 70 than 60 tonight? Oh, no. Awful. So as you can see, we're a very professional outfit here, but we do know what we're talking about, and we're very passionate about this. And I've been following elections since I was 7, so avid about getting the collective picture of the collective themes going on. So let's have a look at the traditionalist generation, which is the 75 to 95-year-old. That's who they are now in 2020. That's that age group. Of course, Biden and Trump both fit that generation. And what you have a look at to understand generations is what was going on economically, what goes on with parenting, and what goes on with technology, and the big events of that time which shape a generation. And that they called the traditionalists, and they're called the silent generation. They come after World War I and lived through the Depression. They have lived through literal invasions and seen social fabric of society absolutely decimated, and been the generation that had to build after World War II, rebuild everything from scratch. They are people who are conformist, who put your heads down. You don't want to bring shame upon your family. There's an incredible fear of difference. And this is something that I want to talk about, how it changes, Jess, through the generations. There's an incredible fear of difference. We live in those times, those communities, there's no globalization. There's no mass communication. You believe what the authorities tell you. You believe what the government says. You believe what's written in the newspaper or that you hear on the radio, on the news. It is true. It is that, well, if they said that, it must be true. There's a subservience. And if we talk in our persona language, and for those who are new to us and don't know the persona language, there's other videos on the Persona Grata page explaining this language. There's ebooks, the User Guide to Humans, there's podcasts, there's YouTube things on my Katie Eden Todd YouTube channel. Go and have a look and hear all about this. But it's very swan, it's very beaver, it's very dog. So it's very important to conform, to come together, to rebuild, to fight together as mates, fight together for defending your country. There's a defensive mindset. We don't want a black mark against our name. We're used to our very small little communities that are very like us. It's very tribal. So we go to church often for social reasons, but we go with the same race, the same class, the same economic circumstances in our suburbs. We cannot travel to cities or to anywhere else. We can stay within a 10 to 20 mile radius for our entire lives. We don't know people of different race, different sexuality, different class, different politics. We just want the same. We're very averse to change. What would you like to add to that, Jessie?
I love that they're called the silent generation, because I think that speaks to a whole lot of things about them. But it was very much of that children seen, not heard.
Yes.
Silent generation in terms of wars. We don't discuss that. There's so much PTSD in that generation because of the silence.
Yes.
And that's part of it too. And part of the not accepting the difference, part of the not knowing that there is difference, is that it's not discussed because it's the silent generation. I think just that title in itself
says a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're silent because they don't protest.
Yes.
There's too much to risk. It's we've got to rebuild. You don't want to bring shame to your family. You can't marry within religions either, by the way. So there's a lot of religious norms here of Anglican can't marry a Catholic. You certainly can't marry a Muslim or a Hindu, or you can't be different. So it's what is normal.
Yeah, and those patriarchal norms as well.
It is white patriarchal norms, because that's the century before that we've come from. Yeah. So this is completely understandable. And women have very set roles and what they're able to do, which is very limited. And men are the ones who have the final say in the families. And it's actually very restrictive and oppressive to all people. Let's put that out there. However, how we're raised in our generations sets our mindset for going along. And as the generations move on, as we go through time, we're supposed to evolve and learn how to go along with how the times are changing. Technology changes, economics changes, society changes. Our media has changed so dramatically, which we go through in little bits. But everything changes. We're meant to keep changing and growing and evolving with that. But what happens is, particularly in rural counties, may I say, but it can be through family lines, that the grandparents' views, which would be in a lot of people's, if they're 75 to 95, would be grandparents or parents, those views are still adhered to in the family. We still think that way. We're still that way. And when we see the pace of change that's happening now, we are frightened. And then we have this appalling media of Fox News and Murdoch, and wherever Murdoch exists in the world, in the States, in Australia, in the UK, he feeds on the fear of difference of the traditionalist silent generation, of the ones who'll just click Sky News, click Fox News, and if they say it, well, it must be true, and then you read the newspaper, which he owns as well, it must be true. And so you get this literal brainwashing that happens. And try conversing with someone from that generation and changing their point of view to realise that this is actually not true. They're the ones who are being fed the fake news. What would you like to add there, Jess?
Yeah, interesting. I think in American politics too is that kind of to an opposite of what you were just saying, is that they see that you're meant to get more conservative in terms of your political views because it matches up with conservative life events to some degree. So, as you get married, as you have children, they see this kind of trend that you start quite democratic, young, you're progressive, and then as you get older, it conservatizes these
you fall into the norms,
and then it becomes more Republican, and that's what they kind of say is what's happened in American politics. And interestingly, as we talk about the generational shift, is that those life events and those milestones aren't being hit at the same time, if being hit at all. And so there's a huge shift about to happen due to that as well, where we see that then we're not going to have this next generation do that rise to conservatism as they get older, because that is the old way of it. Of it happening. And that in Australia too, I would say.
If we don't keep learning and growing and moving along, which when we're in child, we don't. We stick to what we knew, and particularly in our teenage years are so formative. We stick to, and we can get to, well, my dad always said, my mum always said, or our family always said. We can become quite close-minded from a very young age. And there's an archetypal way of being. When I get married, it's like I was allowed to be a bit open and think about things when I'm before that, Jess. It's exactly right. But the traditionalist and silent generation married young and had children young and then put down roots. And it's about building security, making sure you don't ever draw attention to yourself, don't get a black mark and become conservative. And you're very, very frightened of those. I remember my dad would always say when watching, why do they need to dress like that? Why do they need to have hairstyles like that? What's wrong with them? Why do they need to do that? And I was stupid, and I kept on trying to explain to him. If only I'd done the generations research beforehand, I would have realised for him it was just an anathema for his generation. Don't do that. So, of course, we've got a lot of, and the media can play to these fears of division in rural counties because they haven't had the exposure to other.
Exactly how it works is you are scared of what you don't understand. That's all it is. With so much of this, we don't have the information, because if you have the media, 75% of media being owned by one person, Murdoch or someone, if you aren't giving the people the information to fight that fear, it's fully it's a conscious choice to not inform, to not give that information, because we are just scared of what we don't understand.
We are.
And if we help people understand, and even that silent generation, if we could give access to that information, we could shift it. But it's a very purposeful thing done by media companies to not give access to that information.
Yeah, and let me say, while we've had the Trump years, Marty, it's all changing. Hang in right to the end, darling. You're going to be very excited. Stuff's moving, but we also need to take responsibility, as you say, Jessie, to be aware. The younger generations are so much more savvy about what's fake news, and they can't be manipulated the way that the older generations can, because they're digitally so much more on the money. They get it. They see through it. Where was I going there? I've just had a mental blank.
Never happens.
Never happens. So, yes.
Gotcha.
So when we've got a president in Trump and, Scott Morrison, it's on the same ballpark. When you've got those sorts of people sprouting these fake news and these lies out there, and for those who will believe in authority and believe in, well, that must be true then, it's so dangerous. And for me, as a baby boomer, which is the next generation, as a woman a white woman, middle class of the baby boomer generation, to hear an older white male, angry, aggressive, lying compulsively, deliberately dividing and conquering, deliberately spreading hate for narcissistic means, for greed and power, and gaslighting everyone, which is saying that something is black when it is blue, or something is yellow when it is purple, and just never owning anything, which the less you own, the more we have to lie. The more we own of our mistakes, the more integrity we have, the more elder we are. And this man is literally the shadow mirror for the world of, this is a total tantruming child, but on a sociopathic level, as malignant narcissist. And where he's going to go in the next few months, it's going to be serious. This is going to be hard to watch. But when we have that, I'm so relieved that we're not going to have to experience that again. On that level of when you've got a leader drumming up that division, because I do think, for all the limitations that Biden has as someone of this generation and a neoliberal in philosophy, but there's a kindness of heart here, and this is a transition person before we hit the real stuff. And you never go from where you want to go. Think about relationships, people. When you've had fucked relationships, when you've chosen really badly, don't tell me the next one was the love of your life, because I don't believe you. There's always a transition step.
A rebound.
Fucked up badly, It can be a rebound, but it's just a transition because I've got to grow through to the next stage. I'm actually not ready yet for that. That's too much. And the child inside, the child's fear of change is going to be so strong that you actually have to do the transition to get to the next bit, but it's going to happen rapidly, and we can see evidence of this, Jess. But I guess we should get back to the baby boomers. So this is understanding the people who are most opposed to change, and potentially the people who are most in love with Trump's views, because he feeds their fears of difference and that their survival is in jeopardy, with jobs, with economics particularly. He's anti-authoritarian, saying, you don't want to believe those people where I'm like you, and he's so not like them. He is the elite. He is the bottom of the swamp. He has made the more wealthy. It's interesting the people who will vote for him at Swans, if we look at it in a persona perspective, but also the Lions can do so, and because that will protect their money and their extraordinary power, and it protects capitalism. So we've got two foes, Lions and Swans, who can be very drawn for different reasons, but it's always economic. Whereas the people who are anti-Trump, they're not about economics first. They're about relationships and humanity and the vulnerable first. There's a completely different foundational base there, I think.
Yeah, and what's hard with it is because you watch the Trump supporters and what they're touching on and what they're fed up with is absolutely correct.
Fair enough.
It's absolutely correct. And they get concerned about, for instance, there's a lot of pushback against the Green New Deal and about bringing in green technology, and lots of these rural, smaller spots are going, no, because our economy relies on these two coal mines, and the minute you shut these two coal mines down, we are all done. And so you do understand where that kind of, that pushback is, I suppose, to that progressive and why we're not going to vote Democrat. But it's so sad to see that they will then vote for someone like Trump who says, I will keep the economy going. But it's projection. He's done nothing. He's not keeping the economy afloat for you. He's not bringing those jobs back for you. But that for, you know what I mean? It's like you understand where the pain comes from in these smaller communities, why you would jump onto a Trump,
No, I get it. I get it. And there's been a lot of, the Democrats haven't done a whole lot better in that way. And they've become too centrist and to looking after the big fossil fuel companies. They've been, it's like Bernie Sanders says, we'll put ourselves right up here now. We're Bernie AOC supporters. But to us, it's just logical that this is the way to go if we're going to have a planet to live on. But coming back to our topic, because we can ramble here, Jess.
You can tell.
Yeah, I don't know if you can tell. Yeah, we thought we'd have this conversation today, Jessie and I, and then we thought, well, we might as well record it. Why not? Because this is how we are. We might as well share the conversation. Maybe there'll be a couple of people who'd like to listen. So moving on from the very swan, which is the silence, don't talk about the traumas of war, the traumas of the depression, but you are very frugal, very careful, and economically terrified because you have lived through things none of us have lived through, or most of us have not lived through to that degree.
Distrusting of different, because
difference. It's always the distrust. Yes. And what happened then is we have the baby boomers coming, which was the largest number coming through, and they are post-World War II, 1946. There's two groups, baby boomer 1 to 1955, and they got the best of everything for the last 100 years. Free education. Yeah. They got lots of opportunities. If they were educated, they went to the top of the pile and held those jobs for the next 40 years. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Able to have investment properties, holidays. So there's a lot of beaver, but there's line there. But we've also got the swinging 60s starting to come through here. And we've got a big pushback, though, as well. The traditionalist terror of communism and difference set up the Vietnam War. And so the paranoia about communism and we had the McCarthyism, and there's, Reds under the bed and watch out. It's the same thing that is coming up now, still from traditionalists, which it could be Muslims, could be African gangs, it could be trans people, it could be black lesbians, it could be anyone who's not white and hopefully male in thinking like me. When you look at the evangelicals in America, where they go so conservative, social conservatives who want to have back to how it was in the 50s, that's how it is, that don't want to have legalized abortion, want to have the church and the man being able to say what happens to women, being able to keep those roles of the man in ahead and in charge and superior to the woman, which is Amy Coney Barrett, the latest Supreme Court Justice's view of life. There's such a kickback to such extremes, but then it's not going to work. Whatever fights we may have ahead, I'm not naive. I do know there's going to be some very serious challenges here, but people are coming out in the streets like the women have in Poland with the latest abortion laws. So the feminine is rising, people, let me say. The feminine's rising. And within women, men, trans, all genders, the feminine, the heart, the care of humanity over money first is rising, because it has to, because too many people are being lost here. So baby boomers come in, they have the free swinging 60s, and they have the free love, and they get into a bit of Eastern philosophy, but Eastern religions. The Beatles went off and had a guru in India, and they look at Buddhism, they look at all these things. They're using drugs, they're on substances, they're having a good time, but they're breaking free of these incredibly strict mores of the time, of the traditionalist time. But they're still beaver and they're still achievers, thank you very much. And there's our there. And then we have the human rights, the civil rights movement comes forward. Martin Luther King, Black Lives Matter, in our terms. But then we have JFK is assassinated. We have Martin Luther King assassinated in 63 and 65. Robert Kennedy is assassinated. And this puts a real fracture in our belief in government and what can happen and what the pace of change. We go on the moon. Wow, anything's possible. Isn't it great? But we have this other stuff, and the fundamental start of colonialist roots in white European countries now. The colonialist roots of it took a genocide of the indigenous peoples for the country to form as it is, Australia, the US, the UK, etc., etc., etc. Those roots have never been tended to. We've never owned, we've never redressed, we've never compensated, we've never done the right thing here. This is what's coming up now very powerfully, that those rotten roots of 500 years in the making are coming up now to be addressed, and it's karma time. It's karma time. And that's part of the culture war we've got, which the traditionalists and the silent generation says, and even some baby boomers, because they've done well, thank you. If you're doing well in the system and it was built for you, which it was for the baby boomers, you don't have as much incentive to go and protest on the streets and change it. Depends, again, on the level of education, the level of awareness of issues, how well informed you are. But we have, massive gun sales at the moment, which is how they invaded the country in the first fucking place. That's the solution. We'll go and defend ourselves. Swan is very defensive. Lion is very conquering. So we've got both things coming on at the moment. What would you like to add, Jess?
Too much. No, I think let's keep going through the generations so that we can get through to some more specifics, because
we need to get to specifics. I'm not tired at all. My eyes like, who can sleep? I wake up every morning.
Traumatized. God.
Yeah. In the US, did you see all the bills in the US that just made large number of drugs decriminalized in some states? Yes, indeed, I did.
Medical.
We're heading there. It's the way. It's the way. We'll get there. We'll get there. And there's some good things. There's some good things coming. Okay, by the time your baby boomer twos are through, which is 1955 to 1964, and that's me, AIDS is there when we're coming of age. And so suddenly this sexual freedom has changed. There was the pill. That was sexual freedom, that you could have sex and women aren't going to be pregnant and have their lives ruined by, potentially dying of backyard abortions, or, having to have children too young and marry too young, or having to have adoptions, which happened. So it was tragic. All of those things, it changed. There was an empowerment. But when I come in, then there's AIDS, the bowling ball ad. There's terror comes in, and there's a constriction. And by the time I finish all my university years, of which there were 11, I'm having to pay fees for university. It's changing. I grow up in the 70s, though, and in that generation, we have women's lib coming in, and women are allowed to and are supposed to aspire to careers. We have in Australia, no fault divorce. So you don't have to say someone was unfaithful and slept with someone else to get a divorce. It's irreconcilable differences comes in. We have Roe v. Wade in the States, 1973, where you have the right to have an abortion legally, which they are now trying to challenge. And this is a big fight that's coming ahead in America. But watch the protests, and we will protest here as well. People will protest all around the world because men don't get to control what happens to women's lives and women's bodies. So we have that in the 70s, which is really powerful and is a very big game changer of how we see things. Just as a difference, it's interesting with the same-sex marriage, which has been a contemporary issue, Jessie, just recently. Baby boomers were 40% in support of that. I was disappointed to see that, but that's the case. Whereas millennials are 70%. You can see a difference. So there's a 70% are white in baby boomers. By the time we're getting to millennials, it's and Gen Zs, 49% are white. This is the changing of the world that's happening from multiracial, and white becomes a minority, which is why we hear white supremacist. We hear all of these things happening now. I don't understand this world. It's terrifying me. We're changing from white and male dominated, and that system works after hundreds of years. And we're changing to diversity, to minorities being the white, to women having equal rights, to all minorities having equal rights. We're not there yet, but we're on this path, and this is terrifying for people's survival underneath. And when they're fed the horrendous stuff from people like Trump and Murdoch. Murdoch is the next thing that has to go after Trump. Then we've got a chance of really healing what has been so corrupted. It's such a poison. It's a cancer. It's a cancer that exposes where we are, but it also has to be addressed. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah. Again, I've got some.
You want to get to the young generations? We're getting there. All right.
Points for you, but it's once we summarize these generations, we can start to get somewhere.
Next one, Gen Xers. So the baby boomers are 56 to 74, but there's two different groups. My husband's very much a baby boomers one. I'm baby boomer two. Different circumstances for us and different ethos, different mindset. And we had better music. We had Queen. They think the Beatles was the be all and end all. We had Queen. Fuck off. Anyway, moving on. I'm evolved. What can I say? The next ones are the Gen Xers, and this is the 1965 to 1980. And so they're 40 to 55 now. And we've got Swan coming back in much more now. So we've had Swan strongly in the traditionalist generation, silent one. Beaver Line comes in with some Owl in the baby boomers. Then we're getting back, and we've got Owl and we've got Swan coming in. And these kids that are of this generation are the most disengaged politically. They're the first generation of latchkey kids, where divorce is now much more common. It wasn't before. In my generation, it was really rare. There's one person had a divorce in my class. That was it. Whereas it's changed. So these kids come home to empty homes. Mums are trying to have it all and do it all. They're set free. They can go. But it's very, very powerful. They're debt averse, these people. They're not investors. They're quite conservative financially. They're quite cynical. They have less opportunities than the baby boomers did. It gets worse for everyone in the old beaver system. From baby boomer ones, it gets worse and worse as each generation goes, and it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. There's the threat of nuclear war hanging over them the whole way through, which gives a real cynicism as well. Like we have the threat of the global crisis with the climate now, the climate crisis now. We have what we have now is that same fear was there with the nuclear, and there was protest there, but basically they were disengaged. They've also got, this was the time of Watergate and Nixon, who's corrupt, and you've got a corrupt president. It's like, well, how can you trust the authorities? We had the Governor General sack Whitlam, who was the most progressive prime minister in Australia's history. He brought in so much in 3 years, brought it in really quickly, and there was the kickback that the Conservatives found so terrifying of that. Yet now we see those things as good things. Medicare for all, hello. No fault divorce, hello. So many things for the arts, etc., etc. But we have then he's gone. And that sends a very powerful message to this generation that, the government isn't as we thought it was, and it's not sacrosanct. And it has a big impact on their cynicism. They're singles in this time, they're single parent support pensions, so that if you are a parent, you can actually live, so you can leave. So everything's changing, but they're still the most disengaged 40 to 55-year-olds. Then we get to Zennials, which are sort of in between here, and they can be a bit more Gen Xers than they are millennials. These are the 35 to 45-year-olds, and they start bringing in, we get a bit of peacock stuff coming in, and I talk to people about the 1980s, and this is where we had chrome taps, everybody. And we had shoulder pads.
Yes.
And we watched Dynasty, and we watched Dallas about the oil barons, and they were really wealthy. In America, there was a show called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous came on, and that was the first time where you're sort of looking voyeuristically with envy of, oh, I'd love the lifestyle of the rich and famous. Before that, it's understated, but it's Peacock. Peacock's coming through. The owl is very 70s, parrot's very 60s. And now we're in, it's Peacock and Lion makes a return. And we get neoliberalism where we're going to defund lots of social programs. We get Reagan and Thatcher, and this is the beginning of the end, really, for millennials and Gen Zers. It starts here with Reagan and Thatcher, and Johnny Howard goes, oh, me too. Can I be a part of that? I'd like to be that. I'm really important. I'm a big person on the world stage. Fuck off. But anyway, he joins in as well. And I don't know if anyone can tell my politics. I'm being a little bit obscure here. I don't know if people can tell my politics. I'm trying. So what we see here is the neoliberalist is there is no such thing as community. There is no such thing as society. Famous Margaret Thatcher quote, 1979, she's Prime Minister. Reagan's elected in 1980, takes office 81, January 20. And they want to give huge cutbacks to corporations, to the big mega companies. They want to support them, and they want to tax the poor, and they want to cut social programs and say it's your fault, you're a leaner, and we are going to give social security, social handouts to the rich. And all the money's going to trickle down beautifully to the poor and working classes, and that's how society's going to work. And it actually had been working far more equitably. Yeah. Before that, I was so tired. I knew it was a risk coming on today. And it had been working, and then that was the beginning of the end. And in terms of, the amount of poverty, 1 in 6 children in Australia are poor. 1 in 4 children are poor in the UK. It's really high. The number of kids who don't get fed if they don't go to school because of school lunches. Homelessness rises. The Vietnam vets left on the streets where you go to war, but we don't care for you when you get back. And then we have the drug problems, the drug addiction, the homelessness, the mental illness comes in because we only look after those who are successful. So we're back to this awful lion greed. And it's your fault, which is a very American evangelical thing. If you have abundance, you're in God's will, and if you're not, then it must be down to you getting it wrong, as if it's an equal and fair playing field, and it absolutely is not. So we've seen the decline and the dismantling of the system come through very powerfully through there. Through this time, we've got baby boomers can read different sources of news. Some of them will, some of them won't. Depends on their education levels, to be absolutely honest. But when you get to the Gen X's, they may be disengaged and just cynical, and it's all fucked anyway. Yeah. And they're wanting to have a more simple life and escape the rat race, and I don't want to be playing a part of this. And then we get to the Zennials are in between. But we're getting the impact of the digital age, and we get the impact of 9/11, of the Twin Towers coming down, which really could be white patriarchy coming down, which is set off by the Gulf War in the with George Bush Sr., sets off that this all happens. Everything has events that will set up what comes. So our paranoia of communism sets up Vietnam, which then sets up the drug problem and the homelessness on the street, which Vietnam vets. America interfering in Middle Eastern politics and setting up fake wars sets up ISIS where we are today. There is always roots. You need to follow the story and see where things are going. So that's where we got to, and we have 9/11, which is a defining moment for Zennials and Gen Y, which is millennials, who are 25 to 39 years of age. And the Gen Zers are 8 to 24 years of age. And then we've got the new lot, which is 7 years and younger. So we've got millennials are coming in, and this is the digital age. This is the Zuckerberg. This is Lion again, but innovative. This is Steve Jobs, and he's much older. But we've got the tech industry. We've got Sparrow genius of virtual reality, video games, all of that stuff. Reality TV starts coming in. Whereas my generation was what's concrete and very much the traditional. It's real if you can see it, and if it's not, it's in airy-fairy, and get a grip of yourself. It's not real. And now we've moved to a much more imaginative world and a different world. Come on in, tell me about a little bit about the millennials, Jess, and then I'll comment as well.
I think that's I'm right on the cusp. I'm 26, so
yes.
and it's interesting. I think you've and as we've talked about this in groups, if you are on the cusp, you can feel a little bit of both generations of where you come from, where you go. I feel like I've got one leg, here and one leg on the other side. But it is so important, that digital age, that digital turnover that happens at that moment in time. That's when the seeds are now built for what we're talking about now, which is these young people coming through. Because even from anecdotal experience, when we grew up and were able to get on the internet, our parents, you and old generations, weren't able to navigate the internet. You didn't fucking know how to use it. We had just gotten there and we went on blind. And we were the first gen to do that and to have access to all of this at our fingertips. And I think that is probably one of the biggest changes of generational shift, is that the technology age there. And then from my age down, you're kind of now born with technology in your hands. And the power that has for information, for access to information,
they are so well educated. They're politically engaged, the millennials, and they are so well educated, and they know where to get their sources from, and they don't believe fake news. They can't be manipulated. They see through peacock marketing and line marketing. They see the agendas underneath. They're so much more savvy and questioning, Jess. They actually question so much more than the previous generations.
Absolutely. And again, I think it's because you had information at your hands, and because nothing changed about the education system, nothing changed about curriculums. We were still taught the same bullshit everyone else was taught. The gender binary is the only thing that, terra nullius, no one was here when we came as Australians to come and colonize here. We were still taught that. But then at the same time, we had access to information that was true and telling us that wasn't the case. And so you really did have the opportunity to start questioning things. And then, like you say, to navigate through, actually what source is right and what source is not. And that questioning, I think, starts a lot of the awakening of this next generation and down, because we got told a lot of things and we had to find out that we had to unlearn it. We left high school and actually were unlearning the curriculum that was put into us. And from then to now, that's only 10 years ago that I was.
I know.
School, and then I'm a youth worker. I've worked in a high school, and the way that we talk about stuff is completely different because it's been updated, in the last 5 to 10 years. And so much of the fear is eradicated because
you're educated, you're informed.
Yeah, you couldn't come out as gay. I'm 26, right? You couldn't come out as gay in high school still.
No.
That's only 10 years ago. You couldn't do it because people were so scared of what they didn't know. And then that 10-year shift that we've got now, we know we've got the data, the empirical evidence that people are gay and it's okay. And because we've got information, because we've got knowledge, that fear can be eradicated, which is my gen down. We're not scared of that shit, because we know about it. And we've been informed, we've been exposed to it. And that's where you can see so much of, and you can understand, I didn't try to fight grandpa or older generation people on this type of stuff because we completely understand and actually have empathy for why you don't have these views, because you were not exposed and you did not have the information.
No.
And you were purposefully not told the truth. Because
what they were brought up with. So one of the key things that we need to mention here with the traditionalist older generation is their way of defending themselves was there was literal invasion. So it's military. This is the very high spending on military budgets. Like you defend yourself through military tanks and submarines and planes. And, Australia spends trillions on out-of-date ones, and our 5 will stop China or stop whoever, Russia, whoever. And that mindset is you defend yourself with literal armaments. But actually, as we've seen in the 2016 election and we've seen in this election, it's cyber warfare. Now, there are countries that still experience that sort of invasion. Of course they do. But that's less likely to be happening in Australia or in the UK. It's much more going to be sophisticated and subtle. But when you can't get your head around that, you spend a lot of money in the wrong directions and take away money from what is really needed.
Well, and it's the traditional look at what is security.
That's right.
We talk about security, and the traditional view of security is borders. It is borders. It is territory. It is my territory. I have to keep my border safe from threat of invasion, which is ironic when you're the fucking invading colonialists in the first place. But there's a shift in the generations too. From my generation down,
I agree.
Security from borders, state, military to human security. Security of the person, security of us as people, human
of having compassion.
Yeah, having access to food and water, to the right to, it's human. That the way that we look at security is human security. It is not the traditionalist swan. My border is a threat. It is we don't have security in the sense of there are still people homeless. There are still people poor. That is the shift of how you view security. Are you looking at it as the swan threat, or is it the people inside,
And exactly. So I think COVID, one of the gifts of COVID has been to realise that the borders don't amount for much.
Yes.
And that real security when in a COVID world, a post-pandemic world where lots of jobs are lost and will never return. What is security? Well, it's security as if there's a universal income that supports everyone and gives you time to be able to eat, to be able to sleep, to be able to keep your rental, to be able to keep your roof over your head, that there will be services on supply, that we look after everyone is the way that we're all secure. And if we don't look after everyone, we are all at risk. And that's a very big mindset. And I think if we look at Jacinda Ardern, who is a millennial, in looking at how you see the world and what is necessary to make everyone have the best life possible. That's a very big millennial shift from a traditionalist shift. And most of the world leaders, there are more autocratic governments now than there are democratic, Jess, because there's been a big surge since 9/11. There's been a big surge towards autocrats. And that's what Trump wanted to be. He wanted 12 more years. He didn't want 4 more years. And he wanted to be an autocrat and be able to say, count in Arizona, but don't count Pennsylvania because then I win. And he can't understand why that doesn't happen. And it literally, he doesn't understand that because he sees himself as a god, literally as a lion god, and that he should be able to do whatever he wants. But he doesn't understand that in America, their constitution and this democracy is a sacrosanct. It's religious. It's sacred. And there'll be a lot of very decent people across the board, both sides, coming in going, you don't get to touch that because we can see where fascism goes. And they talk about this terror of communism and socialism, which is about looking after everyone. I'm not going communism, but socialism, democratic socialism, a la Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. And then you look at the fascism, you want to live with a dictator a la Hitler. You've got this choice now, and they're not going to stand for that. I totally know they're not going to stand for that.
Absolutely. And it's, again, I think that post 9/11 was so huge for that shift of consciousness. But again, if you're my age, we grew up with that. And we were told to be scared of that. But then in the reality, I look back now, what actually threatened me and my generation is inaction on climate change. It is the rigid sticking to the gender binary. It is not protecting women, not teaching boys in sexual health education about consent and about healthy relationships. Like what threatened me and my friends and had nothing to do with fucking ISIS. You know what I mean? And that they fully tried to peddle that narrative, which the traditionalists and boomer generations. That is their idea of security. It does come from that. We did get invaded. We did have to go to war. I haven't had to go to war. I haven't had to be conscripted. Our generation isn't necessarily buying those narratives anymore.
Those paradigms. That's that idea.
And that is, again, where the shift is going to happen because right now the boomers are the main voting population.
But that changes.
That changes. And so that rhetoric isn't going to keep working.
No, it doesn't work.
What we're going to talk to later about where there is hope because
let me jump in.
Of this. Yeah.
Let me jump in and just do a very quick summary about why millennials won't see it this way and how they are and then how Gen Zers are. So let's just do a quick reminder. The millennials are 25 to 39. So they have had to incur the greatest student debt of all. I was talking to someone the other day. He was talking about she was thinking about being a clinical psychologist and the debt would be $160,000. It's just mind-blowing for someone like me who came through where it was almost totally free. It's mind-blowing to me how that could be the case. So they have the debt. The cost of living is so high. Wages have not kept up in the neoliberal world so that you can't get ahead. You can't just work hard like a baby boomer and you get results. You've got your property, you can start investing. Like, what's wrong with you? Why are your finances so bad? It was never the same. It was a totally different world back then. So they can't get into housing. It's completely unaffordable. They've got these massive debts. If they want to get educated, which they've got to pay back forever, which is in lieu of a mortgage. So you're so far behind the 8 ball to start with. Many of them, you can get, so many have got degrees, like 63% may have degrees, but they can only get minimum wage jobs. So you do all that, you have the debt, and you can go and be a barista. Good for you. Where's the incentive? This old beaver system that, as I said before, it worked for baby boomer 1946 to 55. That cohort got the best of it, and it's been getting worse and worse and doesn't work for all of them. Authenticity is really important to millennials, and tolerance. The millennials and the Gen Zers are born with far less animal personas, far less beaver personas, and they are very much of a humanitarian mindset. They believe they have to come in and help change the world. They have to improve the world. They look at the monetary economic values that comes first, which comes from the world wars, and it was the most war-based century of all time, the 20th century. So they look at that being 21st century as they're coming of age, going, that is just not what's important. What's wrong with you? They have an awareness of the environment. They have an awareness of connection. They don't have the intolerance of different color, of different sexuality, of different class. It's like it's they don't understand how people can hold such bigoted views. They were also born, and I have to say this, of the Harry Potter generation, both of them, where they believe that young people can come up and stand against what's wrong, a la Voldemort, and that they end up winning, and that they can do that. And we see that with Gen Zers when you've got people like Greta Thunberg, you know, a teenager setting a world global crisis, climate crisis awareness awakening. David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez of the Parkland, which is, what was it, For Your Lives, a March for Your Lives. It's anti-NRA, which have done an extraordinary thing in making the NRA far less powerful. They are working, and they go, well, we will die for this because this is what matters. They are. It's funny when you look at someone like Trump, who is amoral or immoral, no conscience, no social conscience. The difference is with these young, and he's the worst example for all of us to measure ourselves against and say, who am I? Am I on this page or am I not? Do I care about my fellow humanity? Is it all about me, or is it we before me? Is it all about me, or is it we before me? Because we all win if it's we before me. The millennials and the Gen Zs just know this. You don't have to tell them. They're born thinking like this. And it's just stunning, and they will be activists. And let's face it, Jess, they need to, because they're young. So
I know many people of this gen that don't want to be an activist, but it's the world handed to you. You know, that is, it's not, you do something or what else is there? There is no other. And that's the choice for our gens is, do we go full nihilist and tap out and just live in the world until it burns, or do we be part of that thing? But that you didn't get a choice. Millennial, Gen Z, and again, working as a youth worker, working with Gen Z and lower now kids, the actual anxiety from climate change is so real. The fact that people talk about the economy makes you want to scream, because the world is burning, you know, like the world is burning, and these kids see it and they're inheriting it, and that the anxiety that is coming through with that is palpable and diagnosable. You know, the sheer amount of it's becoming a phenomena. There is many an article from psychologists about climate anxiety, which we all have. The generation is born into it. It's they didn't get a choice. We don't have a choice to be active.
No, you don't have a choice. So millennials are worried about their future. They've got a bit of line and innovation. They want to work for themselves. They can like that. But Gen Zs are less optimistic than millennials. They're coming in later. They're younger ones, and this isn't this is a more swan, but also nightingale and sparrow. So here we have a generation of very sensitive kids coming through. Very sensitive, feeling, humanitarian, innately humanitarian kids. And there's a reason why you get certain personas coming through in a rush at different decades all the way through. Like there were so many ours, and particularly our women, that were coming of age in the 70s. Hello, because that's what we needed to do to start the women's lib and all of that stuff. So we've got lots of Nightingale coming through for the first time, and Sparrow's been coming through for both. But where feelings matter, we've got mental health issues, depression, anxiety, soul sickness coming through. We've got, I just want to grow my veggies in the backyard and have a couple of chooks, and I can manage the lockdown as long as I've got my internet, because I can my community is online, and I like being local, and I want to come back to local, and and Gen Zers are really particular about where they spend their money. Millennials too, but I'm not going to support a company that has a negative global impact. So they research first, and I'm not going there. And so that's very important to them, which the social conscience is striking.
Yes.
In these, and that's why there's a difference. Now, the good news is, so I just wanted to point out that we've got Swan traditionalists, the 75-year-old plus. Then we get the boomers, which have got a beaver lion ethos coming through with birds, obviously. Then the Gen X's, Swan's there, no lion. Then we come in with Zennials, they're getting a bit of lion, and millennials can have the lion. We can do anything. We're innovators, we're pioneers, and they're very open and progressive. There's a natural progressiveness there. Gen Zers are, do I have to be a lion? The under, Jess, your friend, so the 24 and under, it's like, no, I don't want to have to be an activist. But environmentally, they just can't not. And when they're victims of gun shootings, they just can't not be. So, of course, there are lions in that cohort, but it's like overall, it's more feelings. It's correcting that. It's the feminine rising, where that sensitivity and addressing these things that really matter come to play. And then the alphas, the 7-year-olds and youngers, lions coming in again. So over that cohort will have lion. And you know why? How important are the next 10, 20, 30 years for the whole planet on a climate viewpoint, let alone a social justice viewpoint? And so when you see that, of course, it's going to need to be a line in the alpha generation, which is following the Gen Zers. It is fascinating, and parents are going to be parenting here, and you and I are putting out parenting podcast in the next few weeks, which will be talking about this stuff as well. You can have kids who straddle different generations. I do. I can see in my son Sandon, so Gen Z, and he was educating me about tolerance from the minute he could talk. And you are straddling, and Eden's very millennial. And I learned that I could hear the differences in what you and your friends spoke about.
Absolutely. And I think there's hope to be found in the kind of like what we see from all those traditionalists, and probably even earlier if we had more information.
It's the lost generation before that, which was even. Yeah.
And if we had even more, dating back, you'd see a cycle happening. And if we step back, there's hope to be found in there is always a push of progression when it needs to happen. And then immediately you see the contraction again in that middle generation. But then the next one comes back to push it out. And you can see that pattern that happens. And so there's hope to be found in the contractions that we've got in this Trump era at the moment, because the contractions that happen are purely coming because you can feel the progression behind it coming and building. That is why there is hope in the next gens coming, because if we're in that contraction time now, historically and in pattern wise, looking at the generations, that means the next one is going to be that progressive push.
And I agree, Jess. And so we're seeing, people being frightened by trans coming through because they don't understand it. Like it threatens, how you have sex in your bedroom at home. I'm confused.
It threatens you because we're the fucking best, and we're taking people away from you.
So funny. It's in Australia. It's the Pauline Hanson ignorance and terror, and
all of that is control too. It is, and all of that fear of that stuff has always been used to control, particularly women and your reproductive rights. To control the masses in terms of what type of population do we want. A lot of this literally has its roots in eugenics. It has its roots in biological determinism. All of these types of fears, the Pauline Hansons, that all of those political ideas. That was literally back in the day about making sure that we kept making a white race, an able-bodied white race, that we had control over you. And they are so scared about anyone breaking that away, because you don't have control over us once we find that.
It's true, Jess. And I always think too, just looking at this from a persona perspective for a second, or just a light and shadow perspective that we have, the horrible things that we've done in our shadow. The things that you will fear the most will be the stuff that you have done and you're capable of doing. So historically, the genocidal roots of our country and our world now, we have a fear of the same happening, because it's like eventually you don't get away with it and here it comes. And so we had all those mechanisms which worked for a while, the eugenics that you're talking about, let's keep it white and patriarchal and in all those systems, and shut down opportunities for all the minorities, whatever they may be, and deny vulnerabilities and just do blame, name and shame and blame. But meanwhile reaping all the cream off the top and getting richer and richer as we went. This is the world we've been living in, and it has to die, and it is dying. And Trump was the best example of how disgusting that is and why we don't want it. And people are standing up and awakening. America's being asked, who am I and what do I stand for? And they're going to continue to be asked that in these next 4 years. But as you can feel all this coming, and you can feel the young ones coming through going, we don't believe in this. You see the marches on the street, et cetera, the Black Lives Matter movement, which is the largest movement in the history of America, coming out with all people, of white people, many white people saying, I had no idea there was racism in America now, which is just incredible. Many still think there isn't and that they're the victims. Hello. But there is such an awakening happening, and they're getting educated by their millennial children and their Gen Z children, which is exciting. The great news is that by 2028, the next election, so I reckon we had to have a transition that people would just die of heart attack and you really would have civil war in the streets if you went from Trump to Bernie. I might be wrong, but I wanted Bernie desperately, and I thought that was a chance. But it's like, no, you have to see your ugliness that's not been owned. We have to see the ugliness of our roots. We have to build a different society based on a different foundation, where the feminine leads and the masculine comes in as the strength and support underneath, but feminine values lead. The tribes that did that back in tribal times had the leader of peace was a woman, and they always they had the final say, not the leader of war. The leader of peace always had the final say. And those tribes survived for tens of thousands of years because there was a balance where we haven't had that. We have not had that. So we're having to see that uprising, and it is happening. It is happening, my darlings. So, and, you know, COVID's been helping bring about this. I think Trump would have got in without COVID. I actually think he would have got in. So it's like the Mother Earth has come up and said, and because we've raped and pillaged and wrecked the balance of nature so profoundly with our greed and consumerism and our lion peacock, we can have whatever we want whenever we want. Because we've done that, we set up, we are responsible for COVID. We set that up, but that also comes in as a protector in some ways for Mother Earth.
And you're right, there is a transition period that's needed, because where we need to get to, I don't even believe mainstream wise we're talking about what that actually looks like, because it is quite progressive in the sense of, and people will say that is some socialist bullshit, but what we're talking about, like the systems that need to change, the societal cultural makeup that needs to change, it is patriarchy, the colonial roots of everything. It is so ingrained into us, into who we are, into what we know. That change does not happen tomorrow with Bernie Sanders coming in, and it doesn't change with Biden coming in either. And you know, it's at the end of the day, I mean, I'm not a huge Biden fan, honestly, but the reality is that life or death for people, and not necessarily for us white people, particularly in Australia, but if you're an American, if you are, say, the most murdered person on the planet is trans women of color in America. They're the most murdered population on the planet. So this is life and death for people on the ground there. So we need the transition. You go to the lesser of both evils. Obviously, we take Biden while we need him. But even then, the change that we are talking about that needs to happen, America isn't there yet. They're not there yet. And even coming in with the preliminary votes, some of what we're seeing is actually kind of fucked in terms of, one, how close it was, but also that more white women have voted for Trump this time around potentially than they did last time. Considering the Black Lives Matter movement, considering the education that was happening, considering the education that you have, earlier in the year, every single bestseller on the New York Times list was a person of color. Like during that time, you were educating yourselves, you were there, and then 52% of white women voted for Trump in 2016. It looks like 55 in 2020. So the work that needs to be done
is
on
massive.
a scale for white people, because also if this system works for you, then why would be scared? You'd be shitting yourself. that it's going to change because I'm good, please don't take away the things that I, know, and no one wants to take that away from you, but anyone that isn't you is already living outside of that system and is already experiencing what you are so scared of losing. And so, it's with that, there was also something about, again, because all the votes haven't come in, but it's looking like more LGBT people for Trump as well. But we're talking about cis gay people, we're talking about, and particularly white people. And so even in these circles where we think, okay, well, we're getting more educated and, and even the LGBT community, like they're all there getting more educated, the colonial racist roots
still there.
Stuff is so ingrained. And, we all thought maybe we would be a bit more progressive this time around. The numbers are not
there yet. We're just not there yet. And without COVID, we would not be there at all. We would be having 4 more years of Trump, and we would be having the most hideous gaslighting, which if you've ever had that experience of really traumatic, conflict-ridden, abusive stuff when in a relationship or in childhood, it really brings on PTSD to have that. Like, it really brings on PTSD. And, COVID has actually helped make that not a reality for us. Even though he'll still have his rallies, he'll probably have his own TV channel. He'll also have enormous number of criminal cases coming up against him.
Country who extradite himself, and
well, one can but hope, but otherwise he ends up in jail.
Will go in jail, and then he'll have to go to another country. And the only countries that won't extradite you out are the Muslim countries, or the ones that he pissed off. So
he's not going to welcome here. So let's see. It's going to be so interesting.
Yeah.
So looking at the numbers, by 2028, the millennials and Gen Zs together outnumber the baby boomers. And at that point, we have 49% of the population voting are white, 49. So this is the transition that's coming. And these kids are coming through and they're aware, they're educated. I know when Hillary was running, she said to the kids, because they were so pro-Bernie and she was so offended by that, you need to go and get educated. And they just laughed in her face. They knew more about her policies almost than she did. They could quote, these kids are clever. They've got lots of owls. Someone just said, Jess, your owl is shining. You got to say something nice to me. I know I don't have an owl, but I do my best. Come on.
Your hair looks good.
I do my best. The other thing that's a really interesting stat that I heard this morning, which is that if you take the under 30-year-old vote, which is a mix of millennials and Gen Zs, though millennials do go up to 39, if you just took the millennial votes for this election in America, then the Democrats would have 472 electoral votes compared to 66. They are innately progressive, innately humanitarian, innately relationships and look after Mother Earth first, love thy neighbour, all of these things. And when you talked about the white women and the cis men, meaning people who have, do you want to explain cis, Jess, just for people who aren't familiar with the terminology?
Yeah, cisgender, just in terms of you identify with the biological sex that was assigned to you at birth.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So I was assigned that I was a female, even though I was a tomboy, etc., and very masculine.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
yeah. But I was a woman, and I am a woman. But be it oh yeah, I did birth. I just said I'm doing great, thanks, and I did birth this hour. What a duo! Thank you. But interesting that the progressives would be so far, but we're not quite ready yet. So we've got this transition, and I actually see on a soul level, on a soul contract. Trump had to show he didn't come out of nowhere. He's another virus, but this is the virus of shadow lion, swan, peacock, shadow colonialist, white greed, patriarchal roots. And I'm not anti-men at all. I'm anti-white patriarchy, but I am a stronger person with stronger masculine than feminine within. We've been out of balance for 2,000 years, but the colonialist roots, this is the time in the era changing where we've got to get our act together. We're in a place of transition now. And we've got to keep speaking up for fairness, equity, social justice, Black Lives Matter, being inclusive, being acknowledging that we don't have the right to decide whether a person has a baby or they don't, that I have no right to say that to any other person, that nobody gets to decide these things, that we have to have respect for the whole story of a person and a whole story.
Yeah. I just want to touch on that, what you said with the Trump because I believe the same thing. I believe Trump is here for a very good reason, and it needs to. If we had gone a Hillary, or I mean, even if we go Joe Biden now, I mean, my actual issue with going down that path is that shit stays the same, and you know what I mean. I would always prefer Trump, which as fucked as that sounds, and I know the reality of what that looks like and to live under. I know that, but I prefer that in the sense of, it needs to expose how fucked the system is, because if you get your Bidens and you get these Democrats in who are centrist, and again, a 74-year-old white cis het man,
77,
not either of you, you know what I mean? Like
77, 78
are good for me. So, but yeah, if you have, it needs to show that the entire system is completely broken. Like, for instance, like the electoral college system over there, for instance, you know what I mean?
That has to go.
That has to go, but they count incarcerated people. So incarcerated people, or people with like, they can't vote in America, but they get counted towards the population in the electoral college vote. So like just there are so many parts.
It's so bad, Jess.
And I mean, we know the Russian interference. We know, and so unless you have someone like a Trump coming in, you maintain the status quo, you maintain the norm, and the norm itself is fucked. Like, that needs to go too. And there's there's hope in having the Trump come to us, because it shows that it needs to show what needs to be purged. And I believe in destruction for creation to some degree.
Oh, totally. I mean,
like bushfires, you burn it down to get new growth. And we actually wouldn't burn the system down,
unless
we transform.
We saw how bad it was.
Exactly.
And how corrupt it was. And I said this 3 hours after he was elected.
Yeah.
And I've been in grief for 4 years. Literally in grief, as enduring this, like, oh my God, we've got to, I'm a raven. We face our shadows. We've got to own our work. That's the only way we come out to have the rebirth. You don't skip to the rebirth without doing the work, people. And that's in your life, in my life, in Jess's life, and in nations' lives. We've got to do the work of owning the dark stuff and coming through and correcting stuff. Make it fair, then whatever comes is fine. But the electoral college is fucked. The news monopoly in Australia is fucked.
Yeah.
There's
is ready.
The corporation they are the politicians that take on the money from corporations, and then that's dictating policy. We know about this stuff, but I think we are aware. I give thanks. I know the tragedy of COVID, and my heart bleeds for America going through this. 108,000 yesterday, which got lost in the election spin. But my heart bleeds for them, because nothing's going to be done till January 20.
Yeah.
But then something will happen. And then you'll have people going, well, it's a hoax, and this fake news stuff that comes in. It just breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart. However, I'm grateful. I'm grateful today that, yes, Trump's played his place, and he's really ugly, and his kids are really appalling, and they're going to try and do the Trump dynasty, but fuck off, we're not having it, and I'll fly to America and we'll be on the streets. Yeah, we'll join you. I'll sacrifice my life for this. We're just not doing it. Listen to Michael Moore, people. Go onto his Rumble podcast. It's just fantastic. There's great people out there, but AOC, they're all across this. They're so much cleverer than me. Bernie, they're so much cleverer than me. They've got the solutions, the policies. There's owls out there who've been studying all these problems, what the problems with the militarization of the police to make them carry their AK-47s in the streets, and what happens in there, all of that stuff. There's people who've been studying this for 20, 30 years, and they're ready. I've got the solution. We've got that. That's fair for everyone. We don't want to disenfranchise those who are fearful. We want to look after them. That's the difference. We want well-being to be the number one. We want to make jobs out of renewables, but not the green renewables that are in bed with corporate capitalists who still make the planet still in jeopardy. There's other ways. We've got a whole lot of rethinking that's got to be done. Like you said, Jess, we can't just snap from, I've got this understanding to that. Even I get challenged sometimes, and I'm innately progressive.
That's it. And that is the work as well, I think.
It is the work.
When one feels hopeless, because I got out and I see these systems, and you go, well, fuck, how do we, I want to revolt, but how, other than throw Molotov cocktails everywhere. But I believe the work is individual in us. And we're doing the work of, for instance, I'm trans, I'm a minority, but I'm still a white person. I'm still middle class. I'm still educated. I've had privilege that so many people would have, died for. I have to do the work to untangle my own privilege, to understand how did I get to this position to have the privilege I've got. And if we're doing that internal work, that becomes a collective consciousness.
It does.
It affects the collective consciousness. And when people say that they can't contribute to this movement, they can't contribute to, and they feel hopeless. But it starts here. It starts with us. It starts with decolonizing ourselves. It starts with removing the gender binary in here from ourselves, working through the guilt and shame stuff, which we're doing in our groups at the moment.
I'm going to do a podcast. Yeah. I'm going to do a live on that, Jess, very soon in the next week or so. I'm going to do a live on what is self-love, what is self-love, how to do it, and it's actually healing guilt and shame. And it's not only applying to us individually, it's how do nations heal guilt and shame. Because you can't rebirth a nation and reimagine a new world and a new community-based society, which is about security for all, which is about celebration of difference. It's about honoring diversity. It's loving all and realizing we need all of it instead of the terror of difference. It's the celebration of difference. And I am different. We are all unique. It's the celebration of that. But how can I come to serve? That it's about we before me, and how we're all born to serve. We're all born to come and give of the talents that we have, and how when you start to heal the guilt and shame, you can start to focus on the gifts you have and be brave about it. I was in the shower this morning feeling like death warmed up, took my Panadol, thought, fuck, my head's just not the right place to do this today. We're parrots here, people. We like to be honest. And I'm getting a little message just going, just serve. Just go on and be how you are. Just be how you are when you're talking to your friends, and just go how you are when you talk to Jessie. It's like, this is how we need to be, my darlings. We just need to be what we are and take responsibility for owning our shadows, owning our misinformation and colonization and the appalling education we got at school, which was very much the white supremacist, colonizational, pro-colonizational view, which was just not true. Going on to Facebook pages or other sources, Black Lives Matters and black fellas or whatever, and finding out other points of view, because I still get it wrong and I'm appalled by it because it's just an automatic way of thinking. But it's same with the LGBTIQ, etc. It's on all levels, on class, on race, on sexuality, on gender. We will not be divided. So you can tell whether someone's coming from a right place in what you're looking at. Are they coming from a place of how to build the bridge and come together? And you know what I want to give Biden? He is a natural mediator. He's a natural bridge builder. He's really good at talking to the other side and finding points of commonality. And we need that little bridge first. We can't go from the other one to this one. And on a soul level, he's tried 3 times to be president, and he will be president. And while I don't agree with all his policies by a long shot, it is so different to have a normal human being, unquote, rather than a sociopath. Literally, there's no comparison. Plus, he is amenable. He's not an ideologue. He hasn't got fixed views like Obama had about this is the way to do things. And he was indecisive, Obama, and he made some awful mistakes that he would look back on now and see that set up where we are. And that will come in about 4 to 8 years, maybe 12 years, we'll start to see a more accurate. He's a good man, Obama, great integrity, but the mistakes that were made were very much of the baby boom and traditionalist viewpoint, and it was just so devastating. But Biden, if there's enough of us get out there and there's enough on the streets and there's enough of us educating ourselves and educating each other and getting excited about stuff, he will actually shift in a pragmatic way to the way we want to go, and he will capture millennials and he will capture Gen Zs. And then when the next progressive person comes in, whoever it is in 24, because he'll only be a 4-year president, if that, he'll be a 4-year president. It'll be either 2024 or 2028. And this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's time, because the numbers are there, and she is serving her apprenticeship right now, and she is outstanding, and she beats them with YouTube, TikTok, everything. She knows how to get through.
But Biden's got dog. That's if we're talking personas. There's a dog in there. He's fully got a dog in there because he is malleable. He has got some now. He's already put Bernie Sanders, Bernie Sanders will be in the transition team. I mean, again, it's when people are like, oh, Biden, I'm not sure about it. It's like, you can't even you need that person in the White House just so that people stop dying, from Trump today. But he's not what we're looking for. I'm not looking for another fucking 77-year-old cishet white.
No, of course not.
And he's coming in, and he will never do the change. But he can be that perfect bridge builder. And if he brings AOC in, which I truly think he will, and brings that younger gen under him, it's just a transition team. And I reckon he knows that.
I do too.
I just hope his brain literally can hold on long enough. He is dementors are coming for that man, and like,
I know. Can I say, if you look at Bernie Sanders, you talked about grassroots. Don't look for a savior. Don't look for Jesus Christ to make a second coming. And we get a different leader, and we can all relax and just go about living our lives as there's no going back to the old normal. There is no going back to that. And he always said it was grassroots, and he is responsible for AOC. He was a volunteer. At a bartender and a volunteer waitress, she was a waitress and a volunteer in his campaign. But she came through from that. He is a 78-year-old white cis man, Jewish, and yet he is totally across millennial and Gen Z values, as is David Attenborough. We can't write people off because of that either, because if you've had the capacity to grow, my values are very millennial Gen Z, not baby boomer, and I never fitted well with my baby boomer.
I agree.
Gen.
And I agree. And I don't mean to generalize, but that was a generalized statement. My issue is still, even if Bernie had gotten in, I still would have an issue with that, because it's the white man. There's the policies. Yes, you might be well educated, you might be there. Get out of the table. It's your time's done. The time of the white old citizen, and I'm not to generalize you all as but that you don't represent the majority, and you actually can get around it. You can educate yourself. You've never lived it. You don't live the experience of what it means to be a woman of color living in America. You don't know what it means to be a young kid of a. You know what I'm saying here?
I do know what you're saying, but I don't agree, because you can then bring into your cabinet all the people to make sure you've got more. You've got a cabinet that is a minority white cabinet.
Yeah, but
you can do all of that to make.
I would give it to AOC. You know what I mean? If he was fully on that level, he would know that, and he would, because it's their time. It's her time. It's time for a female woman of color to have the seat at the table and to be the main seat at the table. And
it will happen
to Bernie. And I think Bernie's so great because he would hand that off, because he knows it's actually our time to step aside. Like, it is our time to step aside.
I agree, and I want to mention Rashida Tlaib from Michigan.
Queen.
My God, look at the squad. I posted today Corey Bush in Mississippi. These people have been out protesting every day over a year about the Black Lives, the deaths where people are gunned down, and the work that they have done. They sacrifice their lives completely all the time, and they are now the voices of the Congress. It is exciting. Now, when I just wanted to get back to a point I didn't finish, the white women, that disturbing statistic, 55% potentially voting. This is going to be evangelicals, and over 100 million Americans identify as evangelical, which is with the pioneers who came for religious freedom, to be able to have religion as they wanted to. That's actually in their roots historically as well, and it's all about that white evangelical Christian view, and it's the abundant view. It's the prosperity view. It's when you're in alignment with God. It's Scott Morrison's view. Make sure you know this. The Pentecostal view. It's a Hillsong view. It's all of that, and they are still indoctrinated in that way of seeing the world. It's got very little to do with Jesus. It's got very little to do with what Christianity really is about. All the great religions share similar messages, and the white evangelical prosperity one doesn't fit in any of the rest of them, because it's not what it is. But that's where that vote's coming from, Jess. It was the evangelical were 80% for Trump.
But and there's also, historically, white women double down with white men when things are.
Or they lie to their husbands. They have to lie to their husband to pretend that they voted.
We've got evidence of each historical moment where race started to become a thing again, where you're becoming, the white, power is being threatened. You can see that white women double down with white men, even if it might not necessarily be good for your. So the idea, someone who's great for this, Alok Vade Menon, ALOK. If you Google that, you'll find this amazing gender non-conforming, non-binary artist and writer. Talks a lot about how so much of this is put in race, and how there's a bit of a myth of the sisterhood with some of this stuff, and that women. Actually, you see at times when is it about women and holding women? Actually, white women double down with white men.
They do,
because of
the system works for them. Exactly. And also, can I say, we've had this movement, something I predicted the other day, We've had this movement where we need to really look at toxic patriarchy, white patriarchy, and toxic masculinity, and that can be within women.
Yep.
I give you Margaret Thatcher. Do I need to say any more?
Yeah.
I give you Janet Albrechtson of The Australian. Do I need to say any more? Miranda Devine. Fuck off. That's who I'm talking about, where they're more masculine, they're totally disconnected from the feminine. So we're not talking about that. But I also believe we're going to see toxic feminine coming through now and getting exposed, that you can't have a healthy, loving, compassionate, adult, elder view of society if we don't also own how toxic feminine has played and how we do in each other, because there's only been a few crumbs on the table, and to get your few crumbs to survive, you do other women in to try and get the security or the eyes or the favoritism from the man, or your one small percentage chance to get educated, small percentage chance to get to wherever. This is innate culturally and historically in women. And we're going to see a lot of that, the manipulation, the game playing, the stuff that has happened in women. There is a toxic feminine, of course, and toxic masculinity. We're going to have to account for all of that in us, Jess, as you've said. It's within us. And when we see it, you know, the safest way to be in the world is own it.
Yeah.
Own your shadows, and then go, I didn't know that then, I now and I'll better. The ultimate is truth and self-knowledge, and it's not fucking fake news. It's truth and self-knowledge, and it's owning our shadows and being aware. And if you're not inclusive, you know, love is an action. And if you're not inclusive and if you're still protecting for survival means, then you are still in child. If it's all about survival and fear, you're still in child, and your child brain and child education, child generational viewpoint, and probably you haven't grown with your generation to catch up to how the times have changed. You can then regress, like you said, Jess, as you get older, you can regress back to previous generations' paradigms and viewpoints of life and go back to the traditionalists and go, I feel under threat. I have a very dear friend who said to me that they were really terrified, you know, because of all this trans thing, and that heterosexuals were going to be minorities.
You will.
I was, if only, I was so devastated to hear that misinformation and that ignorance from a person that I have loved dearly for decades. And I actually can't have a conversation there anymore. If there's not an opening there, I actually can't go there, because it's just, it makes no difference.
Well, it's also incorrect.
It's incorrect. It's not a chance of the world. There's not a chance for that to happen. But it's like, you know, Pauline Hanson saying, you know, we're at risk if there's an halal butcher in the street. It doesn't make any difference if you want to go and be a vegan, or you want to go and have red meat and sauce every night. It doesn't make there's room for everything. There's room for everyone. There's not this concept of, if we are moving from white majority to white minority, it doesn't mean that suddenly the minorities are going to treat whites the way whites treated minorities. And that's the fear, and that's the guilt. That's the guilt and shame. And it's not going to happen, because they're actually not vindictive. They just want equality. We're lucky they're not vindictive. But they are so much, in many cases, not always, but they can be so much wiser, because they have been polished hard by far harder circumstances than we can ever imagine. And so they have hit home truths and elder truths, and they're not coming from that place of vengeance, which white people do. Attack, defend, conquer. They're coming from, no, we've got to learn how to get along, and we've got to build bridges. What would you like to say to start finishing up, Jess?
Well, I've actually got some more hopeful things too, because as much as there was, I don't know, as much as this has been a stressful, tense time, there is always really small victories that are happening. And when we watch the news, and we watch, you know, depending on what news you watch as well, and who you're talking to,
please don't watch Sky. Don't watch your local news. Don't watch Sky, and don't watch Fox, because you are totally being brainwashed by Murdoch, who has an agenda. Like, there is, and you can say, no, that's the real news. That's the other. It isn't. There is not a conspiracy of every scientist in the world out there trying to trick you. It's so illogical. Words fail me. Please open out. I need to open my mind more, but we all need to. But go for it, Jet.
But there's been some things that I've found hope in this election too, and maybe we miss it because the mainstream, and also the news, we know the news is about, you get clicks, you get stuff from the scary stuff, from the fear, people buy into it.
People are addicted to that emotion.
We love it, and so we miss all these little good things, and I've literally just got a very small list that I'm just going to, you know, get off to, because this is huge, some of the things that happen. And we had some massive progressive wins that you probably didn't even hear about. In Florida, of all places, You elected the first out LGBT state senator and the first black queer woman into the Senate in Florida. Georgia elected an out black priest to the state Senate. Sharice Davids got re-elected to the House of Reps, and that's the first out LGBT Native American woman.
Yes.
You have a 26-year-old, my age, transgender woman, Taylor Small. She got elected to the state legislature in Vermont. You had, who else did we have? I had a whole, Marie Turner, first non-binary state lawmaker in the US and the first Muslim in the Oklahoma State House. Stephanie Byers, she won in Kansas, of all places.
Yeah.
And she was the first openly elected trans official in that state.
Yes.
And the first native transgender person elected to state. Like, these are huge.
And in conservative places, yeah.
Conservative. These are the southern states, you know. You've got, black gay men being elected. There were 3 trans women yesterday got elected to state senate. Like, that
women of colour
in, you know, the last probably 2 elections. There are these little small wins where people are coming into power. You've got your Cory Bush, you've got the squad back. There is, as much as I always believe, that wherever there's bad stuff, there is equal good, but we're never being
growing
because it doesn't get the media clicks. But there is always good to be found, and if you look into it, there were some amazing results in the last few days. Really progressive results in southern states, you know.
But also, Jess, in New Mexico, their legislator, there's 3 women of color, Indian, Native American women of color. They're in charge now.
Yeah,
there was a lesbian sheriff who was fired by a boss who became elected, and now she's his boss. Yeah. Because people are standing up to this. They are voting. They are saying we're not
on the grassroots level.
So this is where I said at the start, our question is, who am I and what do I stand for? And when we find out that we were unintentionally racist, unintentionally bigoted, unintentionally a victim, if you like, of the education and the system and the benefit and the privilege that we had. Someone said here that it was painful to have to look at my privilege came at the expense of others. Yeah, that's something we actually have to sit with. You don't have to stay there, but it's like being aware of that and not taking for granted and not judging others as being, why haven't you done better, when it's never been close to an even playing field. So, there's a lot of good things there. We weren't ready for any more than that.
Yeah, and the other hopeful note I wanted to end it on was that there's you can have a look at lots of stuff about generational data, but there's places like AmericanProgress.org or something like that. There's some awesome places where people just do forecasts. They just do simulations. They're just seeing what stuff's going to look like going forward. They said that whites made up 69% of eligible voters in 2016. That'll drop to 59%. So you mentioned something like that by 2036, but also by 2036,
2028 it changes.
Okay. But 2036, millennials, Gen Z, and the next gen after that, whatever they call them, they constitute 60% of the electorate by that point. By then, boomers are down to 17% of the electorate. So by 2036, boomers who are now making all the choices, they come to 17%. The silent generation has vanished by 2036. They are no longer there. And they also did simulations where if generational trends didn't change and we all kept voting as we do, but they say they will change because millennials become all the things we've just discussed about millennials, all of the simulations they did favored that the next few elections will go Democrat, because that is where we are going as the generational shift is taking us there. And they did these simulations based on even if nothing changed, just purely on time passing and people dying and people being old enough to vote.
Exactly.
There is so much hope for us still to come.
Totally. And it won't be the Democrats as we see it now, a la Nancy Pelosi. It will not be like that. It's going to be genuinely Democrat, where we care about all classes and we put in programs and we get disentangled from money and, buying votes in with politicians. Like, there's going to be a clean out. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of things to be passionate about. Now, whatever you people are passionate about, what you're good at, whatever your gifts are, we're going to have a hairy time between now and January 20 when Biden gets inaugurated as the president. And Trump's going to do everything he can to bring as much chaos, much attention to himself, destroy as much as he can, because they're trying to preserve the white supremacist, this system, for as long as they can. But the train left the station a long time ago, didn't it, Jesse? Yeah. So it's going to be ugly, and we need to look after ourselves in this time and know that okay, you're having a tantrum in the sun over there, the turtle's on his back, kicking his legs, screaming and inflicting pain, but your time is just about done. Then there will be issues where they think they're going to go a centrist way and things. We need to go out and say, no, that's not enough. We've got to move forward. We've got to move forward. And we're going to be part of that movement on Persona Grata. We always have been. It's about a humanitarian perspective is what we're about. And it's about us living from adult elder.
Yes. And I fully agree. I think, as we've been saying, we've all been finding it tough, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, to look at your privilege and to own that. It's painful and it sucks. I get you. We're all facing that. But at the same time, going forward too, in these next few months, particularly, as painful as it is to look at that and to reflect at that, empathetically, can we imagine what it might be like to exist outside of that privilege for a moment, and outside of that patriarchal privilege, outside of that class and race privilege, and even in Australia, and that I guess I'm putting the message out that if we do have that privilege, we actually need to be the most looking out for our minority brother and sisters and others of all ways, shape, forms, because they are going to be the ones that feel the brunt of this next real fuck transition time. Like we've got the privilege to be able to talk about and analyze it. People are living on the ground experiencing this, and it puts people's lives in the media. It puts it's the minorities that are going to feel it the most, and that's people of color, the LGBT community, anyone who's not the fucking white, middle class norm. And so if we exist in that space, the best thing we can do is to be working on our internal privilege, decolonizing ourselves, looking at what we can unlearn and own within ourselves, and making sure we're reaching out to the people that we know that this time is actually really going to be tough for, which is those who don't have those privileges.
Exactly.
Again, that starts on that.
And in a time where COVID's going to be the worst it's ever been.
Absolutely. And that is
and then we've got Brexit coming in the UK, and the chaos of that, and COVID, the worst it's ever been. The dismantling is still happening. It's all happening.
And we're watching this, and this is stressful and it's anxiety inducing. Again, there's still privilege in that. There are people who are living at another deeper level, and so I suppose that when it gets tough to look at our privilege, when it gets tough to self-reflect and go, where can I do better for me, and and to own that I wasn't doing great, and maybe I didn't do good there, but I'm going to own it. I'm going to come forward. As tough as that is the work that will push us into the next gen, but also spare that moment to think of those who aren't even in that privileged space to do that yet. Yeah,
that's right, Jess. So it's always about putting ourselves in another person's shoes, and that's what the fear of difference means. We never do. The fear of difference is, I just want to have exactly what's around me, and that's it, and all the rest of you can fuck off. But the opposite is the case now. It's like, put myself in other people's shoes, and we would never want to. We don't want that pain. We're at our heart and our soul. We don't want pain for people like this. It's about, that's how we know we're adult and going to elder. We care about the generations to come, and we care about other people's suffering, and we want to be a part of fixing it, because my life is better. I sleep better at night if I know we're all looked after and no one's homeless tonight. I sleep better. It's about changing our perspective that way, and that's what the 21st century is about, and that's a feminine priority as opposed to an economic priority, and that's where we're moving from the masculine age to the feminine age, and we're in the bird age of personas. So there we are.
Just as end on there, but as we mentioned, we came from that globalized neoliberal 1980s and the hangover of that individualism. It's
all about individualism
all the way back now, and we need to bring it back to community mindedness. And that's what it is. It's about thinking, okay, well, I'm good. I'm actually sweet. Well, if you're sweet,
can I offer?
What do I do now? And how do I use my voice? And I use my vote to vote for that person who can't, or for that person who's got it worse off than I do. There is power in individualism that then bleeds into this community collectivism. And so don't be disheartened in this moment and in this time. This is actually the most important time. And if all you can do is read a book that, starts to get you a little bit more informed, or you can have a conversation with someone in your family who might be a little bit racist or has a little bit of a backwards view about something. And if you can start planting seeds, you're doing the work. That is the work. You don't need to go out and revolt. But if we're doing those things individually, it becomes a collective consciousness. And from that,
but I would say, if there's issues like abortion's threatened or Black Lives Matter, or
then we throw Molotovs.
Get on the ground, non-violently. Get on the ground. Get out there.
That'll just
Get out there. Get out there. The feminine is I'll do it, and you can't move. It's the Gandhi way. It's the non-violent way. But we get out there, and it's like, yeah, that's a sacrifice. I would like to stay home and watch football that afternoon. No, go to the march. Let's start showing that we're they're standing up, and that's our way of saying it's atonement for the privilege that we've had, and it's such a small thing to go into their reality for a little while and feel like what it's like, but it's experiential learning, and it's the action of love, not just the words. All right, my darling, we've covered a lot. So from Trump to AOC, we're well on the way, whether it's 2024 or 2028. And even Kamala Harris, who's a woman of color, as VP, that is a massive thing that is going in that direction. Baby boom, we've left the traditionalists there. But it's well on the way, and it's going at the pace it's intended to. So let's take care of our stuff. Let's act and where we can, and let's come from inclusivity. It's we before me, and we came to serve, not to be served. Yeah.
And look after yourself during this time, because it is horrendous. It is time, it's dragging up mud, and self-care. And then once that's all good, who can I give
now, if you know exactly. But remember, you've got good things. We were chose to be born for these times. That we are the exact age we're meant to be. I said to Jess, I'm so tired. I'm 58. I'm nearly 60. I can't do 4 more years, and I don't have to, thank God, because I've been waiting to be able to get on the ground to do the work to change the world in this way as a raven birthing primal mother all my life. Okay, it's now. You're younger. It's happening for you now. But we all came for these times, and we've all got gifts to come in. We're rethreading the global fabric, the global tapestry of the world, as Michael Meade says. Another great person. Check out Michael Moore. Check out Michael Meade. Check out stuff that uplifts you and makes you realize we are part of a big global movement. Now, we're going to put this out as a podcast. We're going to put it out on YouTube. If you think there are people out there who would like to hear this or it would be helpful, please, I'm going to start asking, can we start promoting this message? If you feel this is a good thing for people to know about, we'd really appreciate your support. That would be lovely. So thank you very much. We will see. I'm going to do guilt and shame, healing guilt and shame, because that's individual and collective. And I think that's a very good thing to look at next. Thank you, Jessie. I just love asking.
Thanks, everyone, for just listening to me and Mum have a yarn.
Welcome to our family.
We were going to do this chat either way. And
we recorded it. How brave. I tell you what, it takes courage to come out and do this stuff and put it out there. But that service, it's like, well, this is what we're about. We'll put it out there, and I want you guys to put out what you've got too. All right, lots of love to you all. We'll be in touch soon. Bye.